Before we get started, there will be spoilers for the 1000-year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to come. Okay, we're back with another edition of our Klub Outside Q&A Roundup series, where, as always, Kubo takes and answers a variety of questions directly from fans over on his personal Q&A platform, and then we try to dissect those answers right here and see if there's anything of value to be found. A lot of the time, Kubo's comments are a mix of light-hearted chatter and fluff, but sometimes we are given real, genuine insight into the story and world of Bleach that, for whatever reason, wasn't found in the original material. Now, as always, I'm not looking at every single answer he's ever given, nor even necessarily looking at them in any kind of chronological order. Mostly, I'm trying to curate the answers that I find to be the most interesting, and I think we've got a solid selection this time. We normally end these videos on a slightly more light-hearted answer, but to be honest, I think we've got 4 pretty interesting entries here. This time then, the questions revolve around the evolution of Arrancar and how they might change appearance in their more human forms, the origin of an Arrancar's dominant appearance — it is quite an Arrancar-heavy installment this time in fact — how missing Shinigami are located, and more. A huge thank you as always goes out to M Shadows for providing the translations to the questions and answers. There's a link in the description below to where you too can find them, so make sure to go and check them out. Right, on then with the latest roundup. We'll begin with the topic of the appearance of Arrancar and whether or not it can change over time. I'll be honest, I've never really given much thought to the individual appearances of the Arrancar and why they might be. I always chalked it up to Kubo wanting the excuse to flex his character design muscles once more, and most of the more distinctly different Arrancar seemed to make sense enough on the surface anyway. For example, Baragon, who we'll discuss in detail a little more later on, is really the only elderly-looking Arrancar that I can think of, and this always stood out. But I just took it to mean that he was an inherently ancient hollow before removing his mask in order to gain the power of a Shinigami at Aizen's behest. And yet, age doesn't really mean anything in regards to the Arrancar, as explicitly noted by Lilinette when Ukitake calls her out for being a child. We know that souls do indeed age. Shinigami grow and age just at a much slower rate than humans, roughly 10 years for every human year, and I suppose it was easy to assume that either the same was true of the Arrancar, or they were just kind of frozen in this weird stasis-like aging limbo after removing their masks. And that, to me, is an interesting prospect that I've never considered before. Is that the case, or can the human-like appearance of Arrancar change after the fact? And if they grow and age over potentially thousands of years, would their resurrection change at all, or would it remain the same? I feel like it wouldn't change, since it's emblematic of their original hollow selves. Anyway, a reader decided to ask Kubo about this specifically, with a question that reads as follows. By removing their mask, an Arrancar takes on a human-like appearance. But do any further changes happen due to aging and other such factors? Or is it like in Neliel's case where her appearance changed due to external factors like having been weakened? Nell is an interesting one to bring up, as like the question mentions, she's the only example I can think of where we saw Arrancar's human form at 2 drastically different stages of their life. But here's where things get weird. Nell didn't age down to become a child. It occurred when Reiatsu leaked out of the serious wound on her head caused by Neutra's brutal assault. Now, I'm still not entirely sure how that works or what it even really means. Would that happen to any Arrancar? Again, going back to Baragon, why didn't he turn into a little kid after having a hole blown out of his head by Soifon's bankai? Either way, it definitely would imply that an Arrancar's current appearance is essentially being held together by how much Reryoku they actually physically have stored in them at any one time, if it is capable of changing the way they look simply by leaking out of them. Nell becoming a child is interesting in the sense that the Arrancar then clearly do possess the capacity to age in some sense. Their bodies aren't just stuck the way they are. Nell has explicitly a child form of herself, and so she presumably has an elderly form too on the other end of the spectrum. In the same sense, then, Baragon likely has a child form and a middle-aged form as well. It's either that, or this supposedly childlike version of Nell is quite literally normal Nell, but shrunk right down to size, as Xyloporo speculates. This isn't a child Nell, it is basically just a shrunken version of what she originally was, due to the reishi escaping her head. Again though, why doesn't the same thing happen to Baragon? Anyway, Kubo gave us an intriguing answer, replying, "It ranges from those who change after a few years to those who stay the same for hundreds of years. In general, physical changes occur. However, it's more so due to spiritual and reiatsu changes rather than aging." So immediately off the bat, this possibly links back to an answer we covered in a previous video, when Kubo explained why Neutra's Zanpakutō looked different in the past compared to the present. It all came down to how much Reryoku he currently possessed, and the quality of said energy. It makes complete sense to me that there would be some changes after some time. No one would remain static forever, but it's the manner of how they change if they don't age that's the question. At the start of Kubo's answer, he's referring to the difference in how much an Arrancar's individual appearance might change. Some may change after only a few years, while others remain the same for centuries. In a way, that's reflected in the Gotei 13 as well. The younger captains all altered their outfits and appearances after the battle with Aizen, as though still finding their preferred look, while the older captains stayed exactly the same, presumably having settled on a favourite appearance many years prior. After all, in Turn Back the Pendulum, we saw that Ukitake used to wear his hair in a ponytail. Now, admittedly, where the Gotei are concerned, these are mostly just extraneous cosmetic changes as opposed to actual aging on show here, but I feel like it does still kind of line up. And we do see a few examples of the Arrancar changing over time as well. Outside of Neutra, of course, the Trebestia have new and altered hollow mask fragments in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, while going back to Nell again, she seems to have slightly more pronounced horns in the final arc also. So, here's the thing though, as we actually take a look at what Kubo himself is saying, can we use this to judge how powerful an Arrancar is or not? And what I mean by that is, when Baragon became an Arrancar, was he immediately an old man, or is that a sign that he's become monstrously powerful over time? See, I still lean towards him already being elderly at the outset, but then maybe he grew even older still as he amassed more and more power. Weirdly though, at least to my eyes, Baragon doesn't look anywhere near as old as Yamamoto physically, but he does look older than every other Arrancar. But also, it is important to note as well that these physical changes aren't necessarily related to conventional aging. Kubo says that it isn't a product of aging, so Baragon being an old man almost certainly has nothing to do with it, and is more likely due to what I originally said, the fact that he is one of the oldest hollows in general. The simplest thing to take away from this first topic is that while Arrancar don't age in the conventional sense, their bodies do change as their Reryoku grows and refines and improves over time. The question I have at the end of this particular topic is, how much of the change that we have seen is actually down to their growth, and what is the end game? What does the end game look like for most Arrancar? Neutra's Zanpakutō is a very clear example of evolution, both aesthetically and in terms of how strong he actually is. But the additions to the Tre Bestia's appearance are slightly less so. I mean, it's pretty obvious that their mask fragments have changed in the Thousand Year Blood War arc since the last time we saw them. Sun's mask now sports some additional ornaments at the front, while Mila Rose's now has 2 horns as well. Presumably Apache's feathery plume is an accessory, but her actual mask does appear to be wider in general than before. Anyway, that's really it for this first topic, but it actually segues quite nicely into the second topic, which do feel related, so let's move on. The overall evolution and origins of an Arrancar have always been the subject of debate, at least the smallest, tiniest details. When you see a character like Grimmjow, for example, who is he really? Where did he come from right at the very beginning? We know that Grimmjow was originally an Ajukas class holo before he became an Arrancar, but how much of that holo is actually born from the Grimmjow we know? And how much of that is the person he once was originally, however many years ago? The same goes for really any of the other Arrancar. How much of that human face that's presented to us on the outside is born of one particular soul amidst a sea of potentially thousands? Let's briefly look at the timeline of holo evolution. Holos are the corrupted spirits of the dead, the souls of humans who lost their hearts or remained attached to the human world for too long before being exorcised by a Shinigami, thus turning them into heartless monsters. As we see in the case of Shrieker, a holo can retain all of their memories and personality from their time as a human. When one particularly powerful holo suffers from an endless feeling of void, a longing to consume and devour, they become so ravenous that they may begin cannibalizing other holos too, allowing them to begin evolving to greater heights. This particular holo that has turned on its own kind becomes a Menos, a subcategory of extremely powerful holos that have begun to feast upon their own kind in order to grow even stronger. These particular holos are drawn to each other by their desire to feed, and they will consume each other endlessly, their minds melding and fusing together as they become an even more powerful entity, made up of an increasingly messy mass of holo spirits. These Menos can then continue to transform, first becoming a Gillian, taking on their standard appearance as all Gillian look alike, any individuality of the Menos washed away. However, when a particularly ruthless and powerful personality within the Gillian emerges, it begins devouring its own kind once more, eventually then evolving to the next stage, becoming an Ajukas. The question I have is, does that powerful holo from the very start of this chain retain any semblance of control of itself? When Grimmjow emerged as an Ajukas from the cesspool of evolution, is he a totally new individual born of this twisted abomination that is the growth and evolution of holos, or is it the remnants of that first holo who began to walk upon the path of becoming a Menos in the first place by cannibalizing its brothers and sisters? That was quite a lot, and luckily it is condensed downwards as someone decided to ask Kubo himself, saying, regarding Arrancar who have a human appearance, is it the original appearance of the souls of the holos that cannibalized upon each other that gets reflected? Or is it the appearance of the humans they've attacked up until then that's also mixed in randomly? It's a good question. The second half, however, feels a little redundant, as I don't think anyone ever thought that was the case, and essentially no holo ever has reflected the appearance of their actual victims outside of special cases like Aranjero and Grand Fisher, but that's purely the result of specific abilities on their part. Kubo responded with a fairly simple answer, saying, generally it's the appearance of the Devourer that remains. Again, I think that's what most people suspected, but it is nice to have confirmation. If we go back to that timeline of hollow evolution, then it seems likely to me that the devourer that Kubo is talking about is the initial hollow who began to consume other hollows in order to become a Menos. It's likely this cannibalistic hollow retained some form of control all the way through the process of evolution, even within the twisted mass of souls. The fact Kubo notes it's the appearance that remains is cool too, as it does imply that's at least partially what the original soul looked like. Did Grimmjow have blue hair as a human? Maybe not, probably not, but apart from that, maybe he did look mostly the way he does now. The same goes for characters like Xyloporo and Il Forte Grans, who were noted to have been human alchemists and scientists way back in the day as part of the light novel Spirits Are Forever With You before becoming hollows and then, of course, eventually emerging as powerful Aducas much later on. Presumably, what Xyloporo looks like now is what he looked like back in the day as a human, but we'll never know for sure, but it seems kind of likely to me. I feel like Vasto Lord are the exception to this in many ways, or at least naturally occurring Vasto Lord. For example, the likes of Stark, Baragon, and Ulquiorra didn't seem to go through this same evolutionary process. More, it feels like they've always been this way, this powerful. Ulquiorra was seemingly never a human, at least as far as we know, and was instead born in a deep, dark pit of Hueco Mundo itself. And I guess Baragon could be an ancient human, but again, I'm not sure. And Stark, well, I mean, who really knows? We never got to see his original form. But anyway, back to the point at hand, this makes sense to me. As Kubo explains at the start of Grimmjow's flashback, although the minds of the Menos begin to mesh together and their sense of individuality vanishes, eventually a strong personality can emerge. And it seems likely to me that this is the devourer of which Kubo speaks. I mean, I guess Hollow, like Stark, Baragon, and Ulquiorra, could have gone through all of that sort of thing as well, but I don't know why, it just seems so unlikely to me. Ulquiorra, in the backstory that we get for him as part of the data book Unmasked, it does seem like he originates from the very blackness of Hueco Mundo itself, but again, it's hard to know for sure. Moving on, this next answer feels quite random, but it's interesting all the same, as it actually fills in a genuine blank that we've had for a long time. This is one of those topics where a reader has picked up on the tiniest little thing and turned it into a question, which in many ways feels like Klub Outside's bread and butter, to be honest. There's no real way of even introducing this one, so let's get on with it. The reader asked Kubo the following. Kubo was asked about who is tasked with locating Shinigami that have gone missing, like Rukia back in the beginning of the series. The asker was curious if it's done by some detective force, or if the fourth, yet-to-be-revealed division of Onmitsukido is in charge. So first of all, this feels like another perfect example of the question essentially leading Kubo by the hand to a convenient answer. But this one is more forgivable as it does actually deliver some brand new information as a result, which we always like. Kubo replied with the following, saying, "It is indeed the 4th Onmitsukido division called Hichotai. Due to the nature of its work, the unit has deep connections with the Research and Development Department, sharing a lot of their work." M. Shadows then goes on to say that their take on the translation of Hichotai is Soaring Strategic Unit, which is a cool name. But yeah, this is actually pretty neat. We now know what the 4th unit of the Onmitsukido is. The first unit is the Executive Militia, or the Punishment Force. The second is the Patrol Corps, who are responsible for gathering intelligence, essentially. The third unit is the Detention Unit, responsible for imprisoning and overseeing prisoners, while the 5th unit is the Inner Court Troop, more commonly known as the Raiteitai, who deliver information and messages throughout the Seirete. And now we know the purpose of the missing 4th unit as well. They seek out lost Shinigami. Interestingly, they don't seem to be amazing at their job. The Vizard and every other exiled Shinigami managed to remain in hiding for over a century, And yet, in chapter 50, again as noted by M. Shadows, we do see something that, as far as I'm aware, we never see again. After Ichigo defeats the Menos Grande in Karakura Town, a fly buzzes past Jinta's head and he swats it, only for it to be revealed to actually be a secret transmission device sent by the Onmitsukido to report on Rukia's location. When I say they don't seem to be great at their job, this is kind of what I mean. Kisuke is also like right there, although intriguingly he does seem to turn and leave the scene upon realizing what the fly may have actually been, which is a nice little detail. And perhaps the squad weren't told to be on the lookout for him either, as it was a century ago. Still, it is pretty cool to finally put a name to this unit. Even if it's a small, seemingly pointless piece of lore, getting to fill a new gap like this feels like the ultimate purpose of Kubo's Q&A. If only he would consider doing the same thing for BG9 and Robert Schrift. And finally, for this installment, there was an answer pertaining to my man Akon, so naturally I had to take a look. And, well, it's a fairly simple one, but cool nonetheless. Kubo was asked the following question, which reads, Kubo was asked if Akon fights by mainly using various substances and devices, as he was portrayed in the Hell chapter. While Mayuri does have a Zanpakutō which he uses, the asker doesn't really have the impression of other R&D members carrying one around. So okay, in the Hell chapter we saw Akon fighting for the very first time, which is kind of crazy considering how long he's been around for. But now that he's a vice captain, he's clearly had to step up. He quickly defeats a Hell Hollow by melting it in a pool of acid, essentially, unhooking a vial from the band around his neck and pouring its contents into a puddle of what looks like blood by his feet. I think it is blood, as we see it raining down from another Hell Hollow around Akon in a previous panel. After reciting a series of numbers, which if I remember rightly is a reference to the game of Mahjong, Akon causes the hollow to dissolve as soon as it touches the pool. It's cool, it's really unique, and it's about what you'd expect to see from a character like Akon. And yet this question is a little funny to me, as it is pretty obvious, at least in my opinion, that Akon is literally wearing his Zanpakutō in this chapter. It's not even particularly inconspicuous. What certainly looks like a sword is hanging from his waist, only it is completely covered in thick wrappings, making it impossible to discern fully. So, while it might not be a blade, it is almost certainly his Zanpakutō. And, well, Kubo answers as such as well, saying, Kubo answered that Akon certainly has a Zanpakutō, as well as other miscellaneous contraptions. So yeah, that makes sense to me. Based on the chapter, I would be more surprised if Kubo had said that he didn't have one, to be honest, seeing as he seems to actually have it on his person. A better question would have been, what does his Zanpakutō actually do? Though I suspect Kubo might have kept that to himself. Personally, I can't wait to see Akon in action again, and I have a few ideas for what his Zanpakutō could be. Maybe I'll turn that into a video someday. Alright everyone, but that's it for the latest installment of our Klub Outside Q&A Roundup series. As always, I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from the video today as well. Let me know in the comments which of these topics was the most interesting one to you, the idea of how Arrancar evolve and how they may change their physical appearance over time, yet they don't seem to age. Perhaps it's about who retains the dominant appearance of an Arrancar after they have gone through such a messy evolutionary process. Perhaps you're more intrigued by the fourth Onmitsukido unit, the Hichotai, or maybe you are wondering about Akon's Zanpakutō. Perhaps, like this reader, you maybe missed it in the Hell chapter as well. Either way, I'd love to hear all of your thoughts down in the comments below. And as always, I want to end the video by saying a massive thank you and giving a huge shout out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, without whom I simply wouldn't be able to do this. If you love what I do here over on YouTube and you want to take the support from me another step further, thank you. You can do just that by visiting my Patreon link down in the description of the video, where by supporting me for $1 a month, you can get your name in the credits of every single video just like this one, and by supporting me at the $2 a month or higher tier, you can get every single video I release absolutely free of baked-in YouTube ads. Alright everyone, thank you so much for watching again, I really hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.